They say grief has no timeline, but society does. Exactly 1 year after burying my husband, the whispers started. Friends would pat my hand and say it was time to start living again. My mother-in-law suggested I was too young to remain alone forever. Even my own sister hinted that my 3 children needed a father figure. I was 34 years old, a widow with an 8-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son, and a 4-year-old baby girl. My heart was still learning to beat without him. My late husband, David, had been a successful businessman. He owned a chain of hardware stores across the city and had invested wisely in real estate. Our home was a sprawling mansion in the suburbs, with a garden where my children played under the jacaranda trees. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, he left everything to me and the children. The will was clear, the properties were secure, and though my heart was shattered, I knew we would never want for anything materially. I threw myself into managing the businesses. Every morning, I would wake at 5, prepare the children for school, and spend my days visiting the stores, meeting with managers, reviewing accounts. The work kept the darkness at bay. It gave me purpose when grief threatened to consume me. I was good at it too. The businesses thrived under my management, perhaps because I poured all my energy into them, leaving no room for the emptiness that waited in the quiet moments. It was at one of the hardware stores that I first met James. My car had broken down in the parking lot, refusing to start despite my increasingly frustrated attempts. I was already late for a parent-teacher meeting at my daughter's school, and I could feel tears of frustration building behind my eyes. That is when he appeared, wiping his hands on an old rag, asking if I needed help. He worked at the mechanic shop 2 buildings down from my store. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way, with rough hands and an easy smile. He fixed my car right there in the parking lot, refusing payment, saying it was just a loose connection. We talked while he worked, and I found myself laughing for the first time in months. He had a way of making everything seem simpler, lighter. After that, I would see him around the neighborhood. He would wave when I drove past his shop. Once, he brought ice cream to my children when they were with me at the store. My daughter, Sarah, who had barely smiled since her father died, giggled at his jokes. My son, Michael, asked him endless questions about cars. Even little Emma, usually shy with strangers, let him lift her onto his shoulders. When he asked me to have coffee with him, I surprised myself by saying yes. We started meeting regularly. He would tell me about growing up in the village, about his dreams of owning his own garage someday. He listened when I talked about David, never seeming threatened by the ghost of my late husband. He was patient with my grief, understanding when I cancelled plans because the sadness was too heavy that day. He told me he had been married before, that his wife had left him 3 years ago, taking nothing but her clothes. He had a son, a 7-year-old boy named Kevin, who lived with him. He showed me pictures of a sweet-faced child with his father's smile. He spoke about Kevin with such tenderness, such devotion, that it melted something inside me. Here was a man who understood what it meant to be a parent, who knew about sacrifice and unconditional love. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed. It was not a grand gesture with roses and violins. We were sitting in his small apartment after I had helped him put Kevin to bed. He simply took my hand and said he wanted us to be a family. He said my children deserved a father, and Kevin deserved a mother. He said we could heal each other's broken pieces. My friend Margaret, who had known me since university, urged caution. She suggested I wait, get to know him better, keep my finances separate. But I was tired of being careful. I was exhausted from being strong all the time. James made me feel safe, made me feel like I could finally stop carrying everything alone. I said yes. We married quietly at the magistrate's office. My children wore their Sunday best, and Kevin stood beside his father, solemn and proud. I wore a simple blue dress. Nothing like the elaborate white wedding I had with David, but I told myself that was appropriate. This was a different kind of marriage, born from companionship rather than youthful passion. The trouble started almost immediately, though I did not recognize it as trouble at first. James suggested we should live in his apartment rather than the mansion. He said the mansion held too many memories of David, that we needed to start fresh in a space that belonged to both of us. It made sense when he explained it, though the logic twisted something uncomfortable in my stomach. His apartment was tiny. Just 2 bedrooms, one for us and one for all 4 children to share. My daughters had to give up their princess beds and toy-filled rooms. Michael had to pack his books and model airplanes into a single box. They never complained, not once, but I saw the confusion in their eyes. I saw Sarah helping Emma adjust to sleeping in a bunk bed, whispering stories to keep her from crying for her old room.
I rented out the mansion.
The income was substantial, adding to what the businesses generated. I told myself this was practical, that we were building something new together. I kept the properties in my name, though.
Margaret's voice echoed in my head during the meeting with my lawyer.
Wait, she had said.
Just wait a little while before making any legal changes.
What is the rush? I had bristled at her suspicion then, but I followed her advice anyway. That decision saved my life. Or at least, it saved the lives my children deserve to have. For the first few months, James was attentive and kind. He would cook dinner sometimes, play with the children, help with homework. But slowly, gradually, things began to shift. It started with small comments about the businesses. How I spent too much time at work. How I should hire someone to manage things so I could be home more. How a wife's place was with her family, not in some office. I tried to brush off these comments, but they became more frequent. Then, 11 months into our marriage, he sat me down at the cramped kitchen table and said we needed to talk about our financial future. He said that as the man of the house, he should have control over the family assets. He said it was not proper for a wife to hold everything in her own name, that it showed I did not trust him, that it was emasculating.
I felt ice water in my veins.
I explained, as calmly as I could, that those properties were my children's inheritance from their father. That David had worked his entire adult life to build that security for them. That I was merely the custodian, holding everything until they were old enough.
His face changed.
It was as if a mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. He said if I refused to transfer the properties, he would leave. He said I should remember that I was a single mother when he found me, that he had done me a favor by marrying me, that no other man would want a woman with 3 children and all that baggage from a dead husband.
The words hit me like physical blows. This was not the gentleman who had fixed my car and made my children laugh. This was a stranger wearing his face, spitting venom across the table where we ate our meals. I refused. Of course I refused. Those properties represented my children's future, their education, their security. They represented everything David had worked for, everything he had wanted for them. I would have walked through fire before signing them over to anyone. That is when James showed me who he truly was. The verbal abuse escalated. He would berate me in front of the children, calling me selfish and ungrateful. He said I was a terrible wife, that I had trapped him with my neediness and my dead husband's money. He began comparing me unfavorably to his first wife, the one he had claimed abandoned him. Then came the first push. Just a shove. Really, during an argument. He apologized immediately, said he had not meant it, that I had driven him to it by being so stubborn. I wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake. I wanted to believe the man I had married was still in there somewhere. But the violence grew. A slap. A grip on my arm that left bruises. Once, he pushed me so hard I fell against the wall, and Sarah saw it. My beautiful, sensitive daughter saw her mother being hurt by the man who was supposed to protect us. The shame I felt in that moment was worse than the pain. Through all of this, I was paying for everything except the rent. School fees for all 3 of my children while James only paid for Kevin's education. Groceries, clothing, medical expenses, everything came from my pocket. James contributed rent and nothing more. He said his mechanic's salary was small, that I should be grateful he provided a roof over our heads. I began to understand the trap I had walked into. He had never loved me. He had seen a vulnerable widow with substantial assets and children who needed a father. He had played his role perfectly, saying all the right things, doing all the right things, until I was committed. Until I had moved out of my mansion and into his small apartment. Until I was isolated from the life I had built with David. But I had not signed over the properties. Thanks to Margaret's cautious advice, my children's inheritance remained secure. This made James desperate, and desperation made him dangerous. I started documenting everything. Every bruise, every threat, every incident. I confided in Margaret, who urged me to leave. But I kept trying to make it work, kept hoping the James the First had fallen for would resurface. I think part of me could not bear the idea of failing at another marriage, of my children losing another father figure, even one who had revealed himself to be cruel. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday evening. James came home from work angry about something at the shop. He started in on me immediately about the properties, about how I was ruining our marriage with my stubbornness. The children were doing homework at the small table, trying to make themselves invisible. He grabbed my arm, squeezing hard enough to make me gasp. And then I heard it.
Little Emma's voice, small and frightened, saying, "Mommy."
In that moment, I saw my life with perfect clarity. I saw what I was teaching my daughters about how men should treat women. I saw what I was teaching my son about how to be a husband.
I saw that I was sacrificing their well-being and their security for a man who cared nothing for any of us. I pulled away from James and said, very quietly, that we were leaving. He laughed, told me I had nowhere to go, that I would come crawling back. I packed what we could carry that night. My children moved silently, efficiently, grabbing their most precious belongings. Sarah helped Emma while Michael carefully packed his father's watch, the one thing of David's I had let him keep in his drawer.
We went to Margaret's house that night.
She opened her door without questions, without judgment, and let my broken family spill into her guest room. The next day, I contacted my lawyer.
We moved back into the mansion.
The tenants understood and moved out early. I changed the locks, updated all my security, and filed for divorce. That is when I discovered the truth that made everything so much worse and yet so much clearer.
James was still married to his first wife. She had never left him.
The entire thing had been a scheme. They had planned for him to marry me, gain control of my assets, divorce me, and reunite. They had been willing to commit bigamy for a chance at my late husband's estate. The investigation revealed they had done this before, to another widow, but that woman had transferred some properties before discovering the truth.
She had been too ashamed to press charges.
They had targeted me because they knew about David's businesses, about the mansion, about the investments. My marriage to James was annulled rather than divorced. Bigamous marriages are void from the start. He was arrested, charged with fraud and assault.
His real wife faced charges too.
I testified in court, my voice steady, my head high. I was no longer the grief-stricken widow he had manipulated. I was a mother protecting her children, a businesswoman protecting what she had built. Kevin, his son, went to live with relatives. I think about him sometimes, that sweet boy who was as much a victim of his father's schemes as we were. I hope he has a better life now, with people who will teach him to be a better man than his father. Today, 5 years later, my children and I live in the mansion that almost became someone else's property. Sarah is 13 now, strong and fierce and determined to become a lawyer so she can help women like I was. Michael is 11, thoughtful and protective of his sisters. Emma is 9, still sweet but with a spine of steel. I still manage David's businesses, and they continue to thrive. I have expanded, opened new locations, and built on the foundation he left. The properties remain in trust for the children, secure and untouchable. I will never again allow anyone to threaten what their father built for them. I date occasionally, but I am in no hurry. I have learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who sees you as a transaction rather than a person. My children have learned that a family does not require a father figure at all costs, that sometimes the strongest thing a mother can do is walk away. Margaret remains my closest friend, my voice of reason when my heart wants to override my head. I thank God for her caution, for her friendship, for her willingness to speak truth when I did not want to hear it.
They say what does not kill you makes you stronger. I am not sure about that.
What I know is that surviving makes you wiser. It teaches you that love should never cost you your security, your dignity, or your peace. It teaches you that protecting your children means protecting yourself first. I am not the same woman who married James in that simple blue dress. I am harder now, more suspicious, slower to trust. But I am also more authentically myself. I know my worth. I know I do not need rescuing. And I know that the greatest love story of my life is not with any man, but with my 3 children and the future we are building together, on the foundation David left and the strength I found when I needed it most.